Hey guys, what is up? I'm Swim, this is the stream, and today we're going to be going over this item tier list that I've been working on for quite some time. This is going to be an updated version of the item tier list you might have known that I put out about a month and a half ago, which a lot of people liked, and let me just go ahead and pull it up here. So this is the tier list. This is effectively a spreadsheet that I've been working on for about a month now in conjunction with my good friend Frosty, another Lord player, who, we do a lot of like mathematical analysis, trying to like calculate like average values of these items. And we've gone through and ranked every single item in the game in this score system. So if you don't want to like watch this video and you just want to get this link to this spreadsheet, it's going to be in the description, and the link is going to be updated, whereas the video is not. So, you should at the very least just check out the link, because if you're watching this video and it's like over a week old, it might be pretty outdated. I think there's going to be like, pretty big changes coming to this game fairly soon, but I'm always going to keep the spreadsheet up to date. Anyway, for this video, I do want to go through and kind of explain some of my choices here, because some of the scores are probably going to seem intuitively like a little low, or some of them might seem a little bit high. We're going to go through and basically explain why everything is rated exactly the way it is, and maybe like go over some of these notes. As you can see, we detail like where you should be like placing these items, like on what kind of units, or against what kind of comps. Okay, I'm going to try to breeze through this a little bit. If I spend too much time on each individual item, it's definitely going to take too long. Vitality Booster and Claymore are pretty weak to start. They have low scores. Even with Claymore's buff, basically the problem with both of these items is they don't scale well into the late game. Plus damage is just a weak stat. Plus damage scales with attack speed and, stuff like demon bonuses, but it doesn't really work that well later into the game, and it's only uses to preserve a little bit of your health early. Vitality Booster is like flat health, so it also just doesn't really scale well into the late game when you compare it to something like attack speed or something like armor, both of which scale as heroes level up. A level 3 hero will have more health to get better value out of the armor, and a level 3 hero will have more damage to get better value out of the attack speed, because attack speed is just a DPS multiplier in the game. So as you can see, I rate Blightstone fairly low, but actually a little bit higher than these for this reason. You can see here in the notes, it's basically a percentage damage amp, which means like in the late game, even if you don't have it on a 3-star unit, if you and the 3-star unit that are attacking the same thing, like the unit equipped to Blightstone happens to be attacking the same thing as the 3-star unit, it's a really big damage amp. And it tends to scale a little bit better than Claymore, but still not a super amazing item. Brooch of the Martyr gets actually a little bit better value. It's tricky to use. You do have to put it on like a frontline caster, but the ability to get your spell off a little bit faster is going to be more important, especially after the patch we had there was a dual patch. There was one Friday and one on Sunday, and basically these make it so that after the culmination of both, there's a lot more epic units, tier 4 cost units, which means there's a lot more stuff like Tide Hunters, stuff like Warlocks in the pool. They're going to be a lot more accessible. So there's going to be a lot of like kind of disruptor battles where the first disruptor that gets off is going to potentially win a fight. Brooch of the Martyr gains a couple of points because of that. We can see here I have 3 different tiers for 3 different ratings of Embarrassment of Riches. Embarrassment of Riches is an item that I think a lot of people intuitively overrate. Like when you kind of look at it at first, it seems very powerful, and I myself have for a long period of time like snap picked it on round 1. But my friend Yusu set up an algorithm to basically calculate the average value of embarrassment through the entire game based on this score system, in terms of like the average amount of points it'll basically get you. And we ended up lowering its points. As we can see, Embarrassment Round 2 and Embarrassment Round 1, they're still pretty solid picks, but you don't pick them over just everything. They're actually, they fall off a little bit. They tend to not be like as amazing as some of the top picks here. But they're always going to get kind of broken in certain metas that are abusable by certain items. For example, like right now, Big Time Contract is almost certainly going to get nerfed very soon, but like at this current moment, you see a lot of people picking Embarrassment right now on round 1 because Big Time Contract and like the odds of getting it are just really, really important in this current meta. But that's going to go away when the contract gets nerfed. Then we have Hood and Tranquil Boots. They're both tied up here at 12. They're pretty solid. Tranquil Boots is good in the early game for preserving some health, maybe potentially helping you streak. The regen it gives is actually very impactful. And Hood is pretty great kind of later on if you're against like a lot of magic damage in those lineups. It can actually win you some fights later. There's a chance I might end up like bumping that down a tad though. We'll see. Need to do some more testing on that in terms of like the average amount of magic damage that's dealt over these rounds, because I like to try to keep things as like statistical as possible, which is hard when we don't have like open access to data in this game. Next up we have Gloves and Chainmail. As you can see, these are the top winners of tier 1. Gloves comes in at 14 and Chainmail comes in at 20. So for Gloves, 14 points is quite a lot. Obviously it's basically like tied with Embarrassment round 1 in a normal state. And the reason for that is because attack speed is just a multiplier of DPS. So Gloves plus 25 attack speed is plus 25% DPS, which is insane when you think about it. If you have like a 3-star Luna, even if, let's say, you don't find a Mask of Madness or a Moonshard, your Gloves is going to represent a quarter of her DPS, well, a fifth total of her post-Gloves DPS, but it'll take a quarter of her DPS and give that to your board, which is very powerful in the late game. It's going to be better than even something like a Sacred Relic at that point of the game, right? And Chainmail, similarly, when you have a 3-star tank, you get your Pudges, your Axes, your Omni Knights, depending on what comp you're in, maybe some scrappy tank like Clockwork. It's just going to keep them alive for quite a bit longer, and it ends up being, as I would say, the most impactful tier 1. It's also the basis for this entire scale. You might be wondering, you might be looking at this score system and basically saying, well, where does this come from? It's not out of 100 because the highest value is 75 here at the bottom. And I actually designed this around Chainmail. Basically, I think the easiest way to do it is to set Chainmail, which is the highest tier 1, at an arbitrary point. I just chose 20, so Chainmail's at 20, and I worked my way kind of upwards and downwards from there. So this is the Chainmail scoring system, right? And this is kind of the constant for the score, right? So basically, it's trying to express value in a linear way. So effectively, I can say Chainmail is about twice as impactful as Blightstone, which is very, very close to being true, just because Blightstone, of course, you have it's 3 against 10 if you're just looking at the armor changes, but Blightstone's ability to be useful against like multiple potential attackers, whereas Chainmail only helps like 1 unit's HP amounts. Blightstone can potentially just do a lot more over the course of a fight if it's on something that's kept alive for longer, right? Whereas the Chainmail thing is the unit that dies first into a fight. So it ends up being about half as valuable, and everything kind of falls into place from there. Okay, let's get into the tier 2s. Force Staff is pretty weak. I had hopes for this item, honestly, after the change, I really did. You can use it to counter some heroes like Slark, PATA, melee frontline tanks, as I mentioned here in the notes. But it's just too inconsistent to be taking over something that just helps your stats on the board. Like, there is a dream where sometimes it gets there, but it's a little too weak. And here we can see we rate Smugglers. Again, this is a byproduct of Yusu's algorithm that we kind of like, Frosty and I looked at this and tried to basically take the algorithmic expression of the amount of total value you would get by picking it from this round until an arbitrary round that dictated like the point of the end. We chose round 30, and then adjusted based on the amount of like health cost that we expected you to incur up until that point, right? To be able to maximize your Smuggler value. So we ended up with Smuggler round 2, as we can see down here, being expressed as 22 points. Pretty high, but I think not necessarily as insanely high as it seems. It's definitely an item that can get you a lot of value, but you're giving up an entire potentially powerful item to get that. And as good as it is, right now there's a lot of tier 2 items that are kind of insanely powerful that you're sort of diminishing your odds against, right? Those being stuff like Fall from Grace, maybe like an early Summoning Stone, and Big Time Contract most especially, right? So these numbers are definitely going to be changing as like patches change. Like Big Time Contract, for example, getting nerfed will represent like some change to these numbers probably. We'll see exactly how Smuggler numbers pan out, but like Embarrassment, the item tends to be a little bit overrated, I would say. Probably not quite too much. You can still take this, I still snap it on round 2. I still pick it on round 3 over almost anything. but I don't think it's as immediate of a pick over like some top tier choices. Aegis of the Immortal. You might notice I actually rate Aegis differently depending on the round. There's a very simple reason for this, because Aegis expresses different values depending on the round you find it in, which isn't inherently intuitive at first, right? Like, it makes sense for something like Smuggler or Embarrassment, but why would that be the case for Aegis? So the reason is Aegis is a constant, whereas the rest of these items are variable valued depending on like where you're gonna pick them. But because the rest of the items are variable, they always want to be picked early, right? So the variability of each item being an item that gears towards like gaining extra value as it's picked early actually becomes the constant on this chart, which is kind of interesting. But that means that Aegis should become a variable value, basically relative to being able to gain value from picking a normal item early. Instead, you gain value from picking Aegis later to be expressed in the same numeric system, if that makes sense. Honestly, my explanation for that is a little wonky, but basically, the earlier you pick Aegis, the bigger the opportunity cost of you taking it is, right? If you take Aegis over at Trunkle Boots on round 2, that's a bigger opportunity cost than taking Aegis over Trunkle Boots on round 10, because when you have the Trunkle Boots earlier, they do more than the Trunkle Boots later, whereas Aegis is the same no matter when you pick it, so relative to almost any other item in the game, it's better to pick it later. Okay, so basically what that means is Aegis is not an item I favor early almost at all. If you guys watch me, I've made a couple videos and I say this on stream a lot. I think it's very overrated, but you can still take it on round 2 or 3 over some like very dead items. Like, it's in the same vicinity. It's in the same vicinity as like Vitality Boots, Claymore, Blightstone. Its score ends up being around there. Brooch of the Aggressor marks in a little bit higher. Oh, actually, I should finish talking about the other Aegises as we start to about one. Aegis around 10 plus. I clock it in at 12. It's a pickable item. I do pick it sometimes. You tend to favor it, as expressed in these notes here, when you're behind on health or in an awkward build and think you might lose. When you're just having a bad game and you just want to get like 6th instead of 7th, it just becomes a better choice. Ultimately, though, it's an item that tends to be a bit overrated just because it has a very like flashy impact. Like, it gives you more health in the late game, but other items typically are going to achieve the same thing in a different way, right? If that makes sense. Brooch of the Aggressor, good on casters that can't frontline, such as Necrophos, Witch Doctor, Lich, or Templar Assassin. So the reason for this is normally casters will gain their mana by frontlining. You get like a Disruptor level 2, you put it in front. You get like a Tinker level 2 or 3, you put it in front. It gains mana from taking damage, but some casters can't frontline. Necrophos can in some builds when it gets to level 2, but outside of that, you know, something like Witch Doctor is a good example of someone who wants to cast a spell, perhaps twice, but can't otherwise. So Brooch can be good on those heroes in those situations. It's not really super highly rated, but it's okay. We put Blink Dagger down at 12 right now. Now, this is wildly variable. Like, it just comes down to the meta. So for context, when it was the legendary meta about a month ago, and there was this one day, like for Saturday this week, we had like this legendary meta for like just one small minute. Blink Dagger's value basically doubled, like straight up. It was like 24 or something like that. And the reason for that is because when you're in a meta where like every late game board is just like flinging ults everywhere and it's just a race to get your ult off first, Blink Dagger is a gigantic win condition. That being said, it's a little situational. It can be good to get like mana off a little bit early here, but we're in this meta right now where mana items are decent, but not super amazing, right? So Blink Dagger at 12, I rate about the same as like a Hood or a Tranquil Boots, you know, if this is going to be like round 2. It's good on certain builds more than others. We can see here it's about, it gains bonus points on like Terrorblade, Lycan, Witch Doctor, Lich Techies. Kind of similar stuff to Brooch of the Aggressor, but a little bit different. Arcane Boots, a couple points ahead of Blink Dagger, most notably just for spreading more mana total, although it is less good on specifically like a hero like Terrorblade. If you're in Terrorblade already, you know, if you have Terrorblade paired on 10 and you find a Blink, it definitely is going to gain some points there. And you'd probably pick it over Arcane Boots, but in general, Arcane's extra mana is just going to put it a little bit higher. We have Helm of the Undying. We started to get to the high score values, 21 points. It's a pretty good item. I would say it's a slight amount overrated. It's a little bit awkward to get like the full effect out of this. You want the armor, so you kind of want that armor to be on something in front, but typically your front line is units that are kind of more expendable, so you don't care as much keeping them alive. That being said, it's amazing on Bloodseeker, Terrorblade, and it's good on Slark. Potentially Disruptor as well. I put that there just because it's an option. You know, if you have a level 1 Disruptor and you need to be able to get that ult off, then, you know, the Helm can work on it. But it typically won't be useful until once Disruptor hits level 2. We have Blade Mail a little higher. I actually favor Blade Mail over Helm in most builds. It depends on the build that you're in, though. So, effectively, we can see that Blade Mail is great in builds with natural armor and resistance like Knights, Scrappies, and Warriors. So the reason for that is Blade Mail actually deals damage after the natural resistances, before the natural resistances occur. So basically, against something like Knights that have a 50% resistant shield, Blade Mail will be dealing damage equal to the amount of damage you take before that shield effectively triggers, which means that it's sort of dealing double damage, if that makes sense, considering the Knight's health amount just because they have that natural resistance. It looks like I was in the middle of writing a note here and forgot. Procs before resistances. Okay, Summoning Stone. Very powerful in Savages, solid in Primordials, bad otherwise. So I rate that as a 25. You start to see some of the the situationality occur here, right? Like Blade Mail, Summoning Stone, Fall from Grace, Big Time Contract. All 4 of these are extremely powerful, kind of in their own respective niches. You know, as mentioned with Blade Mail, I actually forgot to mention this. While it is really good in Knights, Scrappies, and Warriors, it's basically pretty terrible in like Savages and Mages, right? Stuff that maybe doesn't have those natural resistances or like a ton of HP on a single hero in front. It's just not gonna do nearly as much against, right? Or for. So yeah, I rate it kind of high, but it does limit you to certain comps, right? So it gets a little bit hard like comparing these. It's kind of more like apples and oranges at that point, right? Summoning Stone is very powerful in like other builds, quite the opposite of Blade Mail builds. Actually, it's powerful in like Savages, Primordials, Primordial Mages, but ends up taking a point over Blade Mail just for the ability to curve into Savages. It's very powerful in this meta. If you get Summoning Stone early and you get Savages, you're probably going to get like the first, a free like top 3 or so. Fall from Grace is nuts in Knights. It's actually so much better in Knights than I think any other builds, but it can be solid in something like Brownies or Savages. And as mentioned, it's kind of bad in most other things. Big Time Contract. Right now I put it at 30. It's probably the best tier 2 item right now. You kind of have to take it right now. It's just a little too good and opens you up to an entire new path. You know, you get like an Ogre 3-star. You get like, you know, some 3-star, you know, as we can see here, Arc Ward and Luna are only demons. So like Arc Ward and 2-star, Luna 3-star, Terrorblade 3-star, Chatafine 3-star, you know, you pop it together and it's just a little too powerful. But as said here, likely nerfed soon. So maybe even by the time you're watching this, it could be a little bit worse. Tier 3s, we have Poaching Knife. I really don't respect this item at all. I've given it so many chances I have, and every time I'm just very disappointed. It gives you a couple gold points, but it's just like, it doesn't make your board stronger. It's just too slow, and it even has a negative impact on your board strength, because to get gold, you're forced to literally put it on a unit that you might not want it on. So very literally, negatively, it makes your board weaker, even outside of the opportunity cost. I really don't like this card. Dawning of Ristal, I also don't like this. Very, very situational. Theoretically, you can definitely imagine a situation you would pick this if you're in something that doesn't heal, and you know you're against like 2 people that are both running like 4 Warlocks. You could maybe take it there, but I think it's a little too situational. Sacred Relic, it's pretty low. I think a lot of people, new players especially, will look at like the plus damage items like Claymore and Sacred Relic, and I think they will probably feel like they're better than they actually are. A lot of players, even like the better players in the game, were kind of falling